Friends, I greet you from Amasya. According to Strabo, the ancient Greek geographer of the 1st century DC, who by a happy coincidence was a native of the city, the name Amasya was given by the name of the Amazon queen Amasis. As you can see, the city is located along the banks of the river, which in those distant times was the famous Amazon River, and today it's Yeşilırmak, or simply the Green River in Turkish. Probably you remember the myths of ancient Greece about the famous tribe of Amazon, which is mentioned in the travel of the Argonauts, and the myths about the exploits of Heracles. And in Homer's Iliad, the Amazon fought on the side of Troy. In general, the place is interesting and has its roots in the antediluvian antiquity. According to researchers, Amasya is the same age as Hattusa and Alacahoyuk, whose age is about 75 centuries. Once it was a country of Amazon warriors, then it became the Pontic Kingdom, and Amasya was its capital, and during the Roman and Byzantine empires this region was called the province of Bithynia. We can only speculate about the times when these events took place. Since I don't have much confidence in written documents, paper will endure everything, but now I understand for sure that the change of each era occurred as a result of and during some kind of catastrophe. Maybe it was a flood, maybe a war. Today we will consider and analyze the structure that are considered to be the tombs of the Pontic Kings, or official historians. In previous video I already talked about so-called Grecian rock tombs. Now we are at the other end of Anatolian Peninsula, 2,000 kilometers from Lycia, in the former Pontic Kingdom. The structures, of course, can be said to be isolated, but they are striking in their truly gigantic size. Look, before the work began, the builders cut off a large section of rock on the area of about 60 by 60 meters wide. I think they wanted to make sure that there would be no cracks around the chambers, and to exclude collapses and landsliding during construction. At least this is reasonable for the safety point of view of construction work. Although there may be other reasons. If you have any versions, write in the comments. Now I invite you to carefully examine these objects. I can't bring myself to call them tombs, and there is no other terms for them yet. Also, at some point they could have served as tombs, but I'm sure they were initially made for other purposes. And so we see that each portal has both a personal base located under a canopy and a common ledge which is now framed by a fence. The lower cornice of the entrance of this tomb is located at the height of almost 2 meters and without any steps leading up, which is at least inconvenient to bring in a coffin with the king. The entrance itself is decorated with small frames. The treatment of the room differs from the Lycian ones. There are no shelves or niches along the walls, but the internal corners were sharply cut, and there are no hints of stone guide. Though the use of a stone door like a sliding wardrobe, as in the Lycian rock tombs, is questionable. If you haven't watched the video by Lyra and Myra on my channel, I advise you to watch it to understand what we are talking about. But on the ceiling and walls there are very characteristic traces. Either water once oozed there, and these are salt deposits or travertines, or these are traces of repairing cracks in the rocks using stoneworking technologies unknown to our level. I also measured the room dimension: 270 centimeters depth, 210 height, and almost 750 width. Thus a good room is 28 square meters, and they removed 60 cubic meters of rock during its manufacture. The elaboration of the external surfaces is not as ideal as in Limara, but all planes and angles are well done. Well, and under the canopy there are the same traces. Most likely these are traces of water. Well, I also measured the inner part of the portal, and here they removed 370 cubic meters of rock, well, or about 1,000 tons of stone. There are clear tool marks on the wall. They are well preserved on a practically open surface, also under a canopy. So weathering has not had time to erase them. I wonder when they were left. We move on, and under the wooden steps we can see stone steps corresponding to the feet of an ordinary person. So these are not some giant builders, and we get to the next tomb, or the central one. Look if the right one, which we just examined, has not yet begun to separate, and there is only a small development along the canopy. Also, judging by the other objects of this complex, this is an important feature, and they all should have been separated from the parent rock. Here, the central one is separated from the rock along the perimeter, and only two lintels remain on the lid. But the leftmost one is apparently completely formed. It also has its own pedestal. The interior is not as high as in the first, but also without any steps leading to the entrance. And look, the room has an interesting geometry. It has a vaulted ceiling located along the axis of the entrance. Remember, this will be important later. Its shape reminds me of the famous man-made Indian caves of Barabar. Here, of course, not in granite but in limestone, but the planes and corners are processed quite well. The dimensions of the room are more modest compared to the previous one, only about 10 square meters, as well as the dimensions of the portal. It would be interesting to do a 3D laser scan and analyze its geometry, but unfortunately I don't have such equipment yet. The outer surface are smooth, also not polished. A fence has been installed now that doesn't allow us to inspect the back part, but it's clear that the corridor goes behind both the right and left tombs. So we move to the leftmost one, and we see that the lid of the monument is processed along an arc, and a clear line of intersection of surfaces has formed. The builders were not interested in the geometry of the grotto ceiling, but there are no chips or nicks on the ceiling that you will see in any mine or edit. It is as if it's melted. Although I understand that limestone does not melt at all because it turns into quicklime from high temperatures. Compared to the previous ones, this is the most finished. Here beneath the entrance there is a small step. Although it's either chipped or unfinished, the entrance itself is somehow very small. Well, not royal, I would say. A little more than a meter by meter, and through it solemnly it's impossible to bring in the coffin with the king. So according to the official version, it turns out something like this. The king issued a decree to build a mausoleum to his person, but forbidden to make a normal tour. You somehow push me through it, perhaps will not drop me down. We examine the inside and look here also the vaulted ceiling, but it's oriented not along the entrance as in the previous one. Remember, I drew attention to this fact, but across. The square is about 17 meters. Its portal is most modest with the height to the canopy 4.5 meters. Right there on the next mountain there are two other similar monuments created by engineers of that civilization. They are somewhat larger than those just examined. The rock itself is also butted well, and here the builders had to cut out a long corridor along the slope. I always try to put myself in the place of those builders, and I again have a lot of questions. For example, why did it have to be made the leftmost one higher than all, and so remote? Why not close as they built the previous three? This is much simpler and cheaper. I think there's fewer technical buildings, and specifically here the engineers needed to avoid the mutual influence of objects, so they distended them. If you have ideas, write comments. Now we will look at the tombs of Mithridat and Pharnax according to the official version. Pharnax's tomb was prevented from being completed by the Romans, who captured this country in 183 BC. As far as I know, at the time the entire Roman Empire fit on the Apennine Peninsula, and they were still more than 100 years before the expansion. Under the modern staircase, stone steps the size as for an ordinary person are visible. The platform of the first object in this group is impressive in its size, more than 10 meters wide, 40 meters long, and the height of the cut rock is about 30 meters. You also understand that there are thousands of cubic meters of removed rocks and hundreds of square meters of processed surfaces. You definitely can't cut this out with diorite balls and bronze chisels. so they had the tools at least no worse than ours. The platform itself is more interesting here than the previous ones, with several chains of planes. The portal is significantly higher, raised to a height of more than a meter above the main platform, and a flight of stairs to enter the portal in its place. But again, there are no steps inside, and no manhole is also not of royal size. The inner room is again in the style of the Berber caves with a vaulted ceiling, and this time it's along the axis, exactly like the roof of the structure. The size of room is only 10 square meters, so smaller than all the previous ones. The portal itself is 6.30 high to the corners and 7 high wide and 2.30 deep. The external form of the structure and the corridor around it are something wrong. It feels like either they were not finished or its form was not important in this case. Also, during the construction of the tomb of Mithridates, the virtual Romans did not interfere with the builders, although they worked out the facade part of the portal well. Look, until now the entire or the protruding part of the mausoleum are vertical and parallel. The technology of stone cutting is alien. On the left side, the strange curved surfaces as if by template. It felt like the stone was soft as butter, and they scooped it up with big spoon. And again the strange streaks from above. We are heading to the next largest and most remote tomb of Parnax. In climbing the stairs, I try to understand whether the stairs and structures are works of the same era or different ones, as the steps stand out against the background of the main objects. Firstly, they are red, so either this is a new replica or they were covered with sand for centuries and did not have time to tan in the sun. A few more steps and a curvilinear corridor which was also scooped out with a large spoon, like the passages around the tomb, and its grey black even on the ceiling. Not to mention the floor. Most likely the steps were cut out later. So we immediately see that the builders did not have time to completely separate the tomb from the parent rock. Also, the outer surface should be flat, and they mainly processed upper part. And look at the width of the finished passage. There you can swing a sledgehammer or a pick. I think they also started the outer processing from the top of those tombs. They seem to have done a good job on the facade, but I don't understand why there are notches on an already level surface. And on the flat places there is again a treacherous yellow-red color. Perhaps others try to level it. Not the builders of the antediluvian civilization, but the Byzantines or Romans. Pay attention, the higher the surface is, the worse its process. Here on the Antas is the expected picture. The builders separated the excess material and have not yet started the final processing. Here the stone is old, is expected already gray from the sun, and where the flat wall is yellow, perhaps recently polished. So you have to look for answers grain by grain. If you have any ideas, write in the comments. These notes are an interesting detail of the technological process of stone processing. They tool penetrated to a great depth into fairly strong limestone in one blow. Otherwise, the trace would have formed like from a jackhammer or like from a milling cutter. And at the same time the rock was peeling off. The ancient masters possessed many secrets that we have not yet unraveled, but which could increase the efficiency of our construction process. And where did they put tens of thousands of cubic meters of mined rock? I assume that the locals took the good stone for their own needs, but there should also be huge boulders here, which the antediluvian builders could out. Well, at the same time, let's look inside. They very high in the smallest room. It also has a vaulted ceiling along the axis of the doorway. Descending, we came across a similar trace, which most likely formed from the water that once oozed from the mountain. Maybe those traces have a similar explanation. All the structures are associated with a collection of clean water, which could be worth its weight of gold after the global cataclysm. Also, I can offer you a more fantastic purpose of the structures. Namely, a device was installed inside the chamber that collected vibration that occurred inside the Earth's crust. The stone conducts sound and ultrasound well, and resonance occurred inside the chamber due of these waves. The spherical surface of the ceiling reflected them inside the chamber, and the gap around the structures helped once again block the leakage of the excited waves. And thus we can get a generator for collecting free energy. Different sizes of chambers are designed for different frequencies. So some antique energy installation could have been placed here. If you have ideas of other possible purposes for these complex white comments. Outside the museum complex, there is another interesting artifact apparently the same age as the tombs just examined, which I think should be shown here. Unfortunately, there was no way to get up to it, so I managed to shoot it from the air. It's similar to them in many ways, but at the same time it stands out from the background. Firstly, by the shape of the portal, very elongated horizontally. Secondly, on the pedestal we see the remains of two square columns in section, which may hint on the presence of a pediment, of course, already in the past. But the entrance to the inner chamber is similar to the examined ones, and the traces of processing and streaks on the walls are the same as those we looked at. Of course, we can assume that this is an unfinished version. By the way, here you can see that they process the ceiling and walls under the canopy using knocked-out technologies. Here it's as if they look out or scooped out the material when it was in a soft or viscous state. The same traces are on the rock to the right. The surfaces are noticeably curved, but at the same time smooth. How do they think they were able to get this? Well, not with a cutting or chiseling tool. In the room you can see the same recess on the floor, but I would like to understand the presence of a vaulted ceiling, and then you could say for sure that at least this is the same era. Well, you can see the steps leading to the podium. It seems to me that this object is from the same area, but for a different purpose. Although we don't understand the purpose of all the structures. By the way, about 150 kilometers from Amasya, not far from the city of Çorum, there is an almost bigger twin brother, the famous tomb of Kapilikaya. During this trip we managed to visit it, but unfortunately during the rain it was dangerous to climb the steep slope, and I also only filmed this point from the air. I hope there will be another opportunity to explore it. However, I want to show it to you too. It's located in the wilderness, and for the last kilometer I had to drive on a dirt road. Here the entrance is located very high, and judging by its size, the structure is larger than its brothers in Amasya. I know that a thorough corridor has been punched around the perimeter, and it's almost completely separated from the rock. Since the same time of structures called the Tomb of Kapilikaya and the tombs of the Pontic Kings are located at a great distance, I think that these were structures of the same civilization, and similar structures may be hidden in the mountains of the Black Sea region and waiting for the explorers. Well, guys, we had an analytical tour of the tombs of the Pontic Kings or no tombs. I hope you made some conclusion for yourself and put likes, write comments, and see you on the channel again.